DPP Community. Thank you for tuning into the 4TheRecord podcast, Digital Product Passports Insights. 4TheRecord is a digital product passport consultancy agency that helps institutions and industry players to develop and implement the DPP strategy. Today, I'm speaking with Evi Moutsipai of EuroCommerce, a principal European organization representing the retail and wholesale sector. I'm talking to her about the DPP position of EuroCommerce, the open questions, implementation challenges, and next steps that she sees for the retail and wholesale sector, but also especially about the potential of the digital product passport and how it can foster new circular business models and have a real impact on the sustainability of the retail and wholesale sector. I wish you an informative entertainment. Welcome to the podcast Digital Product Passport Insights. My name is Susanne Guth-Orlowski, and I'm the founder of 4TheRecord, a digital product passport consultancy agency. My guest today is Evi Moutsipai. She's advisor, product policy and sustainability at EuroCommerce. I'm delighted to have you on the DPP Insights show today. Welcome, Evi.
Hi, Susanne. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome. I'm so looking forward to our discussion. Evi, please introduce yourself and EuroCommerce, and please also your role at EuroCommerce.
Of course, it's as you mentioned, I am an advisor for product policy and sustainability. So my focus is vertical product legislation from toys to detergents and chemicals. But I also cover more horizontal issues related to general product safety, to market surveillance, and as we're discussing today, the digital product passport and eco-design requirements. But indeed, a couple of words about EuroCommerce for your listeners. EuroCommerce is, as we say, the industry association representing retailers and wholesalers. We have a wide membership from international big companies to member states' national associations as members of EuroCommerce. And maybe a couple of words about the sector to realize how vast and big it is and why is it so relevant in this discussion for the digital product passport. The retail and wholesale sector is actually the biggest private sector employer. 26 million people work in retail and wholesale, which represents 1/7 of the working population. It generates this sector 10% of the EU's GDP, and 1 in 3 companies actually are involved somehow in retail and wholesale. And lastly, that's really an important figure, 99% of around 5 million retail and wholesale companies are SMEs. So taking that under consideration, I'm ready to answer any questions you have on the DPP.
Yes, we will be talking about the digital product passport, and you mentioned that EuroCommerce has an idea and their own position on digital product passports, which you wanted to share with us.
Yes, we have some basic principles that are really important prior to starting promoting the digital product passport as the solution to consumer information or as the solution to simplification or supply chain information. And the important thing first is to ensure that this is going to be a solution that is affordable and scalable for companies. For this to happen, first of all, the standards. The standards have to be open, interoperable, international, of course, and based on decentralized information systems. And then, of course, when, as you know, there is a standardization discussions that are happening right this moment, and we have to make sure that the standards are defined in a flexible enough way that many sectors are able to reflect themselves in these standards. And it is important that the standards are future-proof because there might be new technologies coming up, there might be more innovative market changes also introduced in our sector or other sectors. So it's important that the standards are fleshed out in the technical, at least part, in a way that is flexible for the market to adjust. And then it's secondly, the regulatory requirements that are really important for us. So the metadata of that concern the digital product passport, there has to be harmonious provisions, both across EU legislation, but also across member states. And why do we say this? Currently, the DPP is being discussed under detergents, under toys. It has been discussed under construction, batteries. And there is always a small detail or deviation of each legislation approaching it in its own way. So we have to make sure that there is consistency across legislation. And then, of course, when it comes to member states, one member state might ask for the digital label to have that information. Another member state might ask for different information. This is going to create operational costs for companies that are trading across member states. So it's important to have a harmonious system when it comes to information that is requested from the DPP. And then lastly, as I said, I think in the beginning, we have to make sure that this solution is affordable. It's so that the operational costs of having a digital product passport is something that most companies can afford. Otherwise, we're going to see if legislation demands it, and it's really expensive, we might have to see price increases in the products themselves, or companies not being able to adopt this solution, especially SMEs. So we have to make sure that complexity and price are also in our minds while we're discussing the digital product passport.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing your position, Evi. I know that the different product segments are targeted and defined in separated delegated acts, maybe even separated legislations. So I hope that it's taken care of the different requirements for the different product segments. On the labels, I hope that there is no different data there. And this will, I think, has to be discussed in the upcoming eco-design forum, that the requirements are understood and are the same across the different countries. So I think it's important to engage at that eco-design forum to make sure that your requirements are met. And a lot of companies and associations have already been accepted to the eco-design forum. And I guess that's the right space to discuss it there going forward. Coming to the situation, how it is today, if companies, economic operators make claims about their products today, how does that work? What claims do they make? How does it work today, as we do not have a digital product passport today, but we have similar things, right? So what's been done today?
So these are two separate things, but one will help the other. We have the Green Claims Directive that you mentioned, and the directive on empowering the consumer throughout the green transition. These are two pieces of EU legislation that are going to help with using environmental claims that are not misleading the consumer, the so-called greenwashing. Basically, this legislation ensures that the green claims that are being used are substantiated. So there is strict substantiation requirements for companies to provide scientific evidence and life cycle analysis to support the claim about the product. There's going to be third-party verification systems as well to identify, to ensure that a company that is using certain claims indeed gets the check to do so. There's also harmonization and effort for the EU to prevent misleading claims and unfair competition among member states and different companies, different member states using these claims. And then there is going to be, well, not a strict outright ban, but let's say a prohibition to using certain claims unless they are really substantiated. So this is the framework. Now, how are these claims able to be used? Basically, when, let's say, with the digital product passport, there is a company that has certain environmental claims certified or is under a label. This company is going to be able to advertise it basically through the digital product passport. That's the hope of some companies. But of course, we have to see with legislation as it is developing what is going to be mandatory, what's not going to be mandatory as information to enter the DPP. We might see different companies using these claims, but I think that's one answer to your question.
Yes, and I was trying to address something that's actually happening still now. So the green claims is coming in 2 years. It will be. It has been proposed and entered into force 2024, March 2024, and it has to be implemented by March 2026. But that's a little bit the future. We don't have it today. So what do we have today?
Currently, this is This is a discussion that's happening specifically under these two directives. But of course, there is a preceding or other types of directives, usually related to consumer protection and practices, commercial practices in relation to the consumer. So there is different legislation, maybe less focused on these requirements that these two legislations are actually introducing. But there is a framework, of course, there is a framework, and there is certain safeguards in the use of claims. But obviously, these are not enough, and that's why these legislations are introduced. And to answer maybe your question, introducing the connection to the digital product passport, hopefully, maybe the digital product passport might be a tool to check the compliance formally of a product. Maybe the digital product passport itself is not a tool that can assess the truth behind a claim, but maybe it can assess whether indeed a product that carries a claim, a label maybe, whether the product carrying the claim is connected to the issuer of the claim. So maybe just technologically speaking, it might be easier to check compliance.
Is it difficult to check the trustworthiness of claims today? What you just mentioned?
Is it easier? Is it not? Unfortunately, I'm not a market surveillance authority, or I'm not a notified body that is checking. I'm not, or a sector is not in that side of the enforcers and the regulators to have an impression of how easy or how hard it is. What I can say is that it might actually happen. Or as we can see, there is a huge issue with compliance of products, especially entering imports from outside of the EU. We see many of these products getting alerted in the safety gate. So, of course, aside from the green claims, there is an issue with compliance of products with EU legislation in terms of safety or other product requirements. Probably there is an issue also with these claims.
Can you make some examples of where there are issues today about products?
Examples are, I can give you some examples, and I would be very happy to link you up in your podcast with some information and studies we have on those things. Some issues are with chemicals, chemicals in products, especially products imported from outside of the EU. And the reason is that we have a very complete and rich regulatory system legislating what should be in products and not. It's complicated as well to understand, and the chemicals names and sometimes restrictions are really generic for chemical substances, and you miss out on the names. So in any case, one issue we see is with products not fulfilling the safety requirements, especially toys sometimes, how a toy is built, if it's too small, if there's not a proper label below or above 3 years old on the toy. So we see these types of lack of compliance.
I see. Yeah, thank you for making those examples. It's always easier to understand also for the listener. Or for retailers and manufacturers, sometimes not really easy to understand who needs to provide the DPP or what parts of the DPP. Can you shed some light into that question?
That is a question, I think, that's a $1 million question, at least for many sectors, not just the manufacturers, but for everyone in any supply chain, is who is creating it. And in legislation, sometimes you see that the manufacturer, the further upstream you go, the more the obligations. And it makes sense that the economic operators who are creating a product, they have all the information about the product. So they are in the place to create a product passport and include this product information. However, we have to keep in mind that there is other ways that other economic operators might be involved in the creation of a DPP, and why. You have circular business models. For example, you have a retailer that has a product and they want to be involved in operations like repairing it. You have repairers, you have refurbishers who might want to have access to information about the product so they know how to repair it, access to a list of spare parts, for example. Or maybe the product that was initially with the manufacturer now is with the retailer, and the retailer wants to make changes that are going to stay within the specific product. So you have item serialization. So you want a DPP specific on this specific product that belongs to Evi, me, for example.
Is it okay.
So you might want to create copies of an initial passport, you might want to create copies, or in other cases you might want to enter into the original passport and with access rights make changes. But this is all theoretical now, and we're not really sure whether, of course, there's propriety issues and intellectual property issues. The creator of a passport might not want to give access rights, but then it has to be possible for a local copy, to be created by another operator. And the same goes for private label products. Let's not forget private label products. Manufacturer makes a product, but I am labeling it as mine, and then it becomes mine. So who is the manufacturer? Me that I label the product, or you that you make the product? That's another also discussion.
I mean, the eco-design directive says that it's the manufacturer that places the product on the market. Is that helping in any way to find out who has to provide the DPP?
It helps because you use the very key words, placing on the market. If you place the product on the market, so it starts for the first time and becomes available, then you usually you hold the rights to, not the rights, the biggest obligation, which is you're the manufacturer usually. Sometimes an importer might place a product on the market. But in any case, usually this is where the obligations start, with placing on the market. So typically, yes, you can find ways to word it, but what is important is to have an imagination to allow for others to have manufacturer rights, basically. That is the question. It's not about who makes it, but who later on can have rights and obligations, again, on the DPP. That is an important thing for us. And not just for us, but for anyone. And an example I'll give you more practical. Let's say you have a product in a store, and it's an electrical product. There is information that a retailer might want to provide on this particular product, like the legal guarantee of conformity. After 2 years, for example, within 2 years minimum, you can have your product restored, repaired, basically, you can be refunded as a consumer. But the obligation for that is with the retailer. So what if you want, as a retailer, to, of course, have a product passport, that is, you didn't make the product, but you might want to add your own information on the product and save it with a specific consumer that is your buyer, the person who bought the product. So we need flexibility as to who can have what type of rights with
very important information. And as it looks like at the moment in the standardization, we will have a digital product passport with information from the manufacturer, but then information can be added from other issuers. So the retailer is an issuer, and you have to prove that he issued it and not the manufacturer, or also repairers along the way. They have to issue repair messages and logs or charging cycles of a battery. So there's the idea of adding verifiable information to the digital product passport, not by changing it, but amending that information to a digital product passport that has been issued by the economic operator. And it's currently being specified at the JTC 24. So let's see what falls out of that at the end of the year, because that's when the standardization is due. Let's talk a little bit about the business model side. The digital product passport is good to verify the information about the DPP and also the manufacturing circumstances. But I believe that we have more benefits that the digital product passport can bring than only the compliance to a regulation. What are your thoughts on this one, Evi?
I think there are 4 key benefits that we can conceptualize for the digital product passport. And the first one is a group of environmental benefits. First of all, if we use more the digital product passport, we can suppose that less information is going to be on the packaging. And slowly we're going to transition into more information being on the digital product passport, on the digital label. So you might have less need for packaging. So reduce the packaging, so reduce the material that you use for packaging in itself. So waste reduction. Another thing is, as we've talked about before, facilitating more circular business models. So if you can serialize a specific passport to a specific product actually, and link it to a specific client, you might be able to basically have a medical record of the product, how old it is. If you return a product, and you can have a payback systems. If you didn't use it for more than a month, then you might get a big voucher, and then you can use it again in the store, and then you can recycle the product or reuse it or repair it as the store So that you can basically use, there can be a birth of many different circular business models there. And a very important and last thing is about the end of life of products. That's something that is people don't really have in mind and forget, but really important for anything to be recycled. It has to be sorted, and then you have to check, how can I recycle it? So if it's my blouse, right?
Yeah.
What type of recycling can I do? Is it chemical? Is it mechanical? And that depends on the consistency of the product. What type of fabric is it? How was it made? Does it have chemicals of concern inside? Well, many times you might have that information in databases that are really complicated, but what if you can just scan a product and then decide how you can recycle it immediately? Or can you not recycle it if it has substances of concern?
Yeah.
These things might be solving the whole end of life and secondary raw material product situation there. And then 3 more benefits: competitiveness and innovation. This is gonna give a whole breadth of options for companies to present and market products. And the more competitive you are might be depending on how sustainable you are. So we might have more sustainability. Exactly. If consumers choose more sustainable products, then you will have to actually compete based on that. And the third, the consumer experience and user experience and empowerment. The more information and access to information you have about a product, the more able you are to make sustainable choices as a consumer. So that's another benefit. And last one, potential benefit, is simplification. And that has more to do with the traceability and of information and supply chains. And because why? There's reporting requirements under a lot of legislation in the EU. Maybe it might help with supply chain information as well as a tool.
Absolutely. I guess that's in scope. Beautiful examples for the use of digital product passports. Can you think of data that we do not have today that are needed to facilitate those new business models? Or do you think all this data is already somewhere? We just have to bring it into the digital product passport?
Very, very good question. And yes and no. Well, there is an external element and then an internal element. For a company, there is an external element which has to do with how many data can a supplier of mine give me, especially if my supplier is not based in the EU. How can I get this data that I want to put in my product requirements, if it's good or bad? And then, of course, it's sometimes suppliers, for proprietary reasons, that don't want to give access to certain data.
Of course.
So can they collect the data, the suppliers? Are they collecting them?
Do they want
Some
to?
might will. Or do they want to? So there's this thing, external situation. And then, of course, it's the whole data exchange, because with different suppliers, you speak different languages. Some code the color white as 001, others as 002. So you might have like various platforms to facilitate your communication with each supplier. So that's another external issue.
Yeah.
And then there is the internal element that for us is a big thing, or at least we're trying to see whether our members have an issue with that. But it's many companies are using manual processes or Excel sheets. And how do you organize your data internally and the data quality so that it fits immediately into the product passport metadata environment, right? But you have to organize your internal data in a way that it fits easily.
Yeah.
And that is probably it's going to be a big problem. Data exists to some level. The problem is also its quality and how you can organize it and fit it in the passport.
Absolutely. Yeah. And with regards to the data exchange in the upper supply chain, I would like to point the listener to the activity of the United Nations, which is the United Nations Transparency Protocol. We probably also link it in the podcast description, which is currently being developed to do exactly that, to find a way to easily exchange supply chain data between actors that don't know each other, that don't have a direct relationship, that can ad hoc exchange verifiable and trustworthy data. And I'm sure there will be at some point a podcast just about that to facilitate digital product passports. Evi, when I'm thinking about digital product passports popping up in retail stores everywhere, what do we need in retail? Do we need new skills? Can the people that work in retail easily work with digital product passports? What do we need there?
Well, we for sure need to make sure that all companies, especially SMEs, can organize their data, as we mentioned before. And then for that, we need fair transition periods first. And we need trainings, of course, capacity building for SMEs, and especially maybe not necessarily for in-store staff, but staff working behind and organizing enterprise resource planning, for example. That's not something that every small company has. So there needs to be some piloting and support in member states as well. But these are actually the skills that we need more. I think it's going to make life easier as we move forward. But in adapting it and then making sure that all the information about the product, you take pictures of it to put it in the passport or anything you might be having to do, people need some training on it or some time to get used to it, especially if it's people or at least staff in smaller companies.
Speaking of the countries that provide a lot of products to the European Commission, also developing countries, they're also facing the fact that digital product passports become mandatory in the European Commission. How can we, especially those small SMEs, but also developing countries, can we ensure that they're not falling behind with digital product passports becoming mandatory?
That's a very tricky question because there is an element of business interest there. What can economic operators do to train their own supply chains? Because they have a benefit in ensuring that their own supply chains provide them with good information or quality products. But then there is a more foreign policy element that has to do with to what extent the European Commission or the European Union with its foreign instruments or bodies it has and representation convinces countries, third countries, to reach these standards. But that's, of course, not always easy and it's not always the case. So we have to make sure, at least for a minimum, that the standards for using the digital product passport we're starting. It's not really expensive. Open standards, for example, as we said, there's not vendor lock-ins, there's not high costs in entering into this market in the first place to make sure at least. And there has to be some training because aside from the technology itself being equally or freely available, third country suppliers, they have to have a simplified vision of how do I comply with EU legislation? And there is a lot of it. So our own suppliers can do some of the job, but we think that it has to be a collaboration with, of course, the institutions, simplifying or at least putting in really simple words for those not working or existing in the EU or operating in the EU to be able to comply and help the supply chain, basically.
Thank you. And we are already coming to an end a little bit. I have just one or two more questions. You mentioned costs, but I wanted to ask specifically for the cost issue again. As EuroCommerce, what's your view on the DPP costs? What do you think a DPP can cost, should cost, or shouldn't cost? What's your take on that?
There's no specific numbers, especially not for the moment, because many of our members are are now in a position of starting to explore DPP solutions, of starting to piloting. Some of them they haven't started. Some of them are really advanced, but there's different levels of speeds at EuroCommerce and I think in general. But in terms of the cost, we have to consider regulatory requirements that might increase it. For example, storing the backup copy to the digital product passport for 10 years with an external operator, that might be really costly. Or at least if the digital product, the product passport service providers have to go through certification schemes, that might trickle down into more costs. That might make everything more expensive. So we have to keep in mind the operational cost of the digital product passport, storing it or making it, whatever it might be. And of course, many companies will need to use DPP service providers. And maybe in the beginning, because it's a new market and it's everything is in a pilot phase, everything might be very cheap. And then suddenly the prices might go really high. I don't know what type of yet safeguards can be there, but we have to consider this is going to be an additional operational cost for companies, and probably the DPP is here to stay. So it's important to keep in mind conditions that might increase its price in a way that we're not going to like it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a reminder again to formulate reasonable requirements for the different product segments of the DPP. Again, this is discussed in the Eco-Design Forum, which meets for the first time in February. There's a continuous call for alliances to apply for it, and we have to discuss those questions there. What are reasonable data that we need? How much does it cost? Is it really having enough impact? What kind of burden does it put on the economic operator, the retailer, or anyone in the supply chain? So this is upcoming. And Evi, we're at the end of this podcast. Do you have a final message that you want to give to the audience and listeners, DPPs in retail?
Yes, the final message, I guess, is that we have big opportunities to untap with the use of the digital product passport or the digital label. As long as we make sure that the solution is, as I said before, flexible, future-proof, open, international, accessible, and affordable. And the circular economy, consumer choice, supply chain traceability are all going to be options for companies and for consumers with the digital product passport. And I stop there, I think. Thank you so much, Susanne.
Thank you, Evi. Thanks for joining me today. And I'm looking forward to speaking to you again. Bye-bye.
Likewise. Bye-bye.